welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into intercultural communication
Yeah, specifically looking at popular culture, how audiences connect with it.
and how cultural differences, shape how we see media. We've got some great source material here.
Absolutely. Stuff looking at audience engagement, the role of nationality, using Lord of the Rings as a key example there.
Right, and also representation, power structures in media, alternative viewpoints emerging.
And even things like Orientalism and tools like the Bechdel test to kind of measure representation.
So the mission, really, is to give you a framework, a way to critically look at the pop culture you consume every day.
And understand that complex mix of culture, identity, and media. It's not straightforward.
Okay, let's start with popular culture itself. The sources define it as, well, a place where shared meanings get shaped, right? Often contrasted with high culture.
Exactly. Think of it as the everyday stuff, movies, music, TV shows we all engage with. It's less about, say, opera or classical art, and more about these common cultural touch points.
And they influence how we see the world and ourselves.
Definitely. Now, how audiences interact with this is key. The material brings up the critical dialectic approach.
Okay, what's the main takeaway from that?
Well, the core idea really is that audiences aren't just empty vessels. We're not passively soaking up media messages.
Yeah.
We're actively interpreting. We decode things. We might challenge the intended message, maybe even create totally new meanings from it.
Right, so like different people watching the same film might see a character completely differently based on their own life.
Precisely. And the sources give a really good example of this agency.
The Barbie one.
Yeah, how the LGBTQ plus community has taken Barbie narratives and created their own sort of queer readings and storylines.
That's a perfect illustration, isn't it? Shows how active audiences can be.
It really does. How something can be given a whole new meaning, maybe one the creators never even thought of. That active part is crucial.
Okay, let's shift to that Kuiper study on The Lord of the Rings. It tackled this on a global scale. What was the big question?
Kuipers was essentially asking, does your nationality, your home country, really dictate how you understand a global blockbuster film?
The assumption being that, yeah, your cultural background would be huge.
That's the common thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But what the research found was, well, pretty interesting.
But wasn't the main thing.
No.
Yeah.
Nationality wasn't the primary driver of interpretation. Factors like age and gender actually seem to play a bigger role.
Really? So older viewers, or women, interpreted it differently, regardless of being, say, German or Japanese.
Yeah, the study noted older people and women tended towards more negotiated readings, meaning they might have been a bit more critical or picked up on different things, maybe questioned certain aspects more than, say, younger male viewers.
Huh. So shared life stage or maybe gendered experiences were more of a common ground than national culture.
It seems that way, at least for this specific massive global text. Things like maybe a different take on heroism or relating differently to character dynamics.
So it challenges that idea that national identity is always the default lens for media.
It does. And the study also mentions the film, being from Hollywood, sets up certain expectations globally.
Ah, right.
Which ties into this idea of banal cosmopolitanism.
Banal cosmopolitanism. Okay, break that down.
It sounds complex, but it's basically about the everyday, almost unnoticed ways we experience globalized life. You know, watching the same Netflix shows, hearing the same global music hits as someone halfway across the world.
That shared cultural space we just sort of live in now.
Exactly. That's the banal part. It's ordinary, everyday. So maybe viewers connected with Lord of the Rings through, like, shared fantasy genre knowledge or universal themes more than through their passports.
But it doesn't mean nationalism just disappears,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
The sources mention banal nationalism, too.
Right. They coexist. Banal nationalism is those subtle, everyday reminders of national identity flags, sports teams, the way news is framed. They're still there.
Okay.
But Klaper's point is that for huge global media, nationality might not be the automatic go-to filter for understanding how people react. It's more nuanced.
Which brings us neatly to representation and, well, power structures in media. The lack of diversity behind the camera in Hollywood is a major point in the sources.
Huge. Because who tells the story shapes the story, right? If it's predominantly one group, their perspective naturally gets amplified.
And given Hollywood's global reach.
Its narratives have historically tended to center, white often male experiences and norms, which then get exported everywhere.
And that connects to whitewashing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Casting white actors in non-white roles.
definitely. And the sources link this to the idea of colorblindness.
The idea that race doesn't matter anymore.
Right. Which sounds positive on the surface, maybe. But the argument is that in a world where racial inequality still exists, ignoring race often means ignoring the disadvantages some groups face.
And it implicitly reinforces the status quo, where white is often treated as the unmarked norm.
Exactly. It suggests that not seeing race somehow levels the playing field, but critics argue it actually just makes existing inequalities harder to see and address. It benefits the dominant, unmarked group.
So can audiences fight back against these dominant images?
They can, and they do, but it takes effort, right? It requires critical thinking, being aware of these dynamics.
And having access to alternative stories, presumably.
That's key, because the reality, as the sources point out, is that dominant groups, historically, white men still hold a lot of power in shaping media images and defining what's considered important or normal.
It's a structural issue. Now, what about alternatives? Bollywood and Hollywood are mentioned. Are they really changing the game?
Well, their emergence is definitely significant. They offer different perspectives, stories rooted in different cultures, and they're reaching bigger audiences.
But they face hurdles.
Big ones. Compared to Hollywood, they often struggle with, budgets, global distribution networks. It's hard to compete on that scale.
And even within mainstream Western media, some old stereotypes persist. Orientalism comes up.
Yeah, Orientalism. It's this historical pattern of how the East, a very broad term, gets portrayed by the West.
How does that look in practice?
It tends to swing between two extremes, really. Either romanticizing the East as, exotic, mysterious, full of ancient wisdom, maybe deserts and magic carpets, or portraying it as threatening, violent, irrational, dangerous. Think about common terrorist tropes, for instance.
So even something seemingly fun like Disney's Aladdin could still participate in that.
It can, yeah. While it might seem like positive representation in some ways, critics argue it can still lean into that exotic, romanticized view and subtly reinforce certain stereotypes or us versus them boundaries, even if unintentionally.
Let's talk more about race specifically. The idea that white characters are often just human, but characters of color are primarily defined by their race.
That's a really sharp observation from the source material. It points to white privilege within media narratives.
How so?
White characters often get the privilege of being complex individuals, protagonists whose race isn't their defining trait, they just are, whereas characters of color are frequently marked by their race or ethnicity first.
Which can limit the kinds of roles available.
Often, yeah, leading to more stereotypical supporting roles, while white actors get a much wider range of character types.
But we do see challenges to this, right? Like Black Panther is mentioned as a counter-narrative.
Absolutely. Films like Black Panther are vital because they actively push against those norms. They center Black characters, Black culture, agency, excellence.
Offering a different vision.
Exactly. But it's important, as the sources imply, not to see one or two examples as proof the whole system has changed. We need to look at the overall patterns. Quantity and quality of representation matter.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the Bechdel test. Sounds simple, but seems quite revealing. What is it again?
Super simple criteria, actually. For a film to pass, it needs 1, at least 2 named women,
Right.
2, who talk to each other,
Right.
and 3, about something besides a man.
That's it. It sounds almost too basic.
It does, and yet the fact that so many films still fail this very basic test tells you a lot, doesn't it?
It really highlights how male-centric storytelling often is.
Exactly. It throws into sharp relief how often female characters are just satellites orbiting male characters, or their conversations revolve entirely around men. It's a simple indicator of marginalization.
And the sources say people have adapted this test.
Yeah, people have created variations to look at race, sexuality, other intersections of identity, asking similar questions. Are marginalized characters talking to each other about things central to their own lives? It's a starting point for analysis.
And these representation issues aren't just in film, right? The music industry is mentioned too.
For sure. Similar patterns. Underrepresentation, especially in certain roles or genres, pay gaps, women artists often getting less favorable festival slots, things like that. The structures can be quite similar across different media industries.
So pulling all this together for someone trying to get a handle on it for, say, exam prep, what are the key takeaways?
Okay, main points. Popular culture isn't just fluff. It's where meanings are actively made and contested. Audiences aren't passive. They interpret and decode. Kuiper's study suggests nationality might be less key in global media reception than factors like age or gender, pointing towards banal cosmopolitanism.
Mm-hmm.
Representation is deeply tied to power. Who gets to tell the stories matters. Whitewashing and colorblindness can actually mask inequality.
Got it.
Orientalism persists as a problematic way of portraying the East, and simple tools like the Bechdel test can effectively highlight ongoing representation issues for women and other marginalized groups.
That's a great summary. And leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Given how much global media we all consume.
Yeah, how can we become more conscious of the subtle messages shaping how we see ourselves and how we see others?
And maybe actively seek out different stories, different perspectives.
That's the challenge, I suppose, becoming a more critical, more aware consumer of media.
Excellent. Now, for a full summary of all these concepts we've discussed, plus practice tests to really nail down your understanding, remember you can head over to gradeguru.nl.